It is now time for the Robesonian Sports Report with Chris Stiles on 97.1 FM, 1340 AM, WAGR in Lumberton, covering sports for Robeson County. Now here's your host, Chris Stiles.
Welcome to the Robesonian Sports Report here on a Thursday morning on WAGR. I'm your host, Chris Stiles, sports editor at the Robesonian, and looking back at, as we get underway here, at the first round of the state playoffs in high school football. And unfortunately for Robeson County, it is the last week of high school football, as all three teams that made the playoffs lost in the first round. And so, locally speaking, the season has come to an end. Rolesville beat Purnell Sweat 62-0. Hartford County beat St. Paul's 44-36. And Southwest Edgecombe beat Red Springs 43-13. So, starting at the game that I was at Rolesville, the top-seeded Rolesville Rams beating the 32nd seed Purnell Sweat Rams. And Rolesville was just relentless from the start here. Looked every part of being the top seed. 7 of its first 8 offensive plays went for either a first down or a touchdown. The 8th play of that stretch was a good gain. I think it was 2nd and 3, something like that. They also took advantage of some Purnell Sweat mistakes in that early part of the game, in addition to just being so good themselves. It was 28-0 after a quarter. Then they scored on the first play of the second quarter to make it 35-0. Scored again with 9 minutes left in the half to go up 42-0, 49-0 at halftime. Very much a blowout. Josh Deese, the Purnell Sweat head coach, did say he was proud of his team for playing well enough to make the playoffs throughout the season, this was the first appearance for Purnell Sweat since 2017. And he said this is where we want to be every year, and we need to, keep that in mind throughout the offseason, working to get back to the playoffs and try to advance in them perhaps next year. He did point out making the playoffs despite that loss to Lumberton to end the regular season. But even though they did get in, that still hurt them in the sense that they wouldn't have been in that situation going to the 1 seed had they taken care of business against the Pirates the previous week. Certainly something to look at as you kind of postmortem this season for Purnell Sweat. Rolesville will host number 17 seed Wake Forest in the second round on Friday, which that's a rivalry game up around the Triangle area. Those two schools split from each other a few years back. So it was Wake Forest Rolesville High School once upon a time. An interesting note there up in the Triangle as the playoffs continue. Elsewhere, Hartford County, the 12th seed in the 2A East region, beat number 21 seed St. Paul's, as I mentioned, 44-36. Back and forth game. The Bears of Hartford County scored a touchdown with 5.5 minutes left to take that 44-36 lead. St. Paul's turned it over on downs with 2:50 to play. Did get the ball back with under a minute left, but turned it over on downs again there in the final minute. Kind of got behind the chains and just made it a little difficult for themselves on that possession. St. Paul's did lead 22-12 in the second quarter of this game and 22-20 at halftime. Kind of back and forth in the third quarter. Teams kind of trading scores, and Hartford County led 36-29. St. Paul's had tied the game just before that Hartford County go-ahead score about a minute before it. And then Hartford answered quickly with a touchdown to take the lead there about halfway through the fourth quarter. Tyler Parks had a couple of touchdowns for St. Paul's, a punt return, and a running touchdown. He really has kind of come on strong here to end the season. Had a couple touchdowns as well in the regular season finale, I believe. Jalen Kennard, a couple touchdown catches from Theo Setzer. Joshua McBride also had a touchdown run. Hartford County advances to head to Wallace Rose Hill down here in southeastern North Carolina this week. St. Paul's finishes the season at 6-5, but that's after an 0-3 start. So Mike Setzer was pleased with how his team was able to turn things around this season, and they really figured some things out in the second half a season that kind of could have come off the rails when they were 0-3, but certainly did not, and they ultimately finished second. in the Southeastern Athletic Conference and made the state playoffs. Here on the Robesonian Sports Report on WAGR, I'm your host, Chris Stiles, sports editor at the Robesonian, talking through the playoff games from last Friday night from Robeson County's high schools. And Southwest Edgecombe, the number 3 seed in the 2A East region, beat number 30 Red Springs in a 43-13 game. Score not really indicative of what happened here. This was a close game for most of the evening before the Cougars did pull away in the fourth quarter. It was 21-13 at halftime, and then there was no scoring in the third quarter. And then Southwest Edgecombe had 22 points unanswered in the fourth. Coach Tim Ray for Red Springs said fatigue certainly was a factor here as got late in the game, and Red Springs wasn't able to be quite as effective really on either side of the ball as what they had been to that point. Red Springs' 2 touchdowns did come from their 2 biggest playmakers all season, with Jakelson Mack scoring on a touchdown run. TJ Ellerby had a touchdown catch, which came from quarterback Scotty Locklear. Red Devils finished ultimately one game under 500 at 5-6, but that's a 4-win improvement from last year and from the last 2 seasons, actually, when they won 1 game in each of those. And a lot of there's some key seniors certainly on that team, but a lot of the core coming back, including both of those dynamic playmakers I mentioned, Jakelson Mack and TJ Ellerby. Southwest Edgecombe will host Farmville Central, the 14th seed, in the second round this week. And then looking at the collegiate level locally, and UNCP had a bye week last week, but they will host Concord on Saturday at 4 p.m. This is the season finale for the Braves, and they're looking to win their 4th straight game to wrap up Coach Mark Hall's debut campaign. Concord lost a close game to Notre Dame last week, Notre Dame of Ohio, the Division II school, 24-14. And the previous week was their only win of the season, 38-9 over West Virginia Wesleyan. Concord is allowing 37.7 points per game, scoring just 17 points a game. They're 1-9 on the season, 1-8 in the Mountain East. And Concord has only rushed for 59 yards per game. That's a pretty low number. Although you will, there is some context here that they've been trailing most of their games, so having to throw the ball maybe a little bit more than would be desired as they've tried to come back in some games. But nonetheless, 59 rushing yards per game, a pretty low total, and something that the Braves will be looking to seize upon defensively. Quarterback Jack Mangle has had a decent year for Concord with nearly 2,400 passing yards, 18 touchdowns. He does have 17 interceptions, though, on the season. Receiver Chris Copeland has caught 85 passes for 923 yards and 8 scores this year. Concord leads the series 5-4 all time and has won 3 of the last 4. This includes a 58-56 win last year in Pembroke in a 5 overtime game, kind of an instant classic. And as a little bit of an aside, I kind of want to go back to that weekend last year because it wasn't just that football game. This was one of the craziest weekends I can remember, certainly in my duties as sports editor at the Robesonian. So UNCP basketball opened this season at 11 a.m. that Saturday morning with what turned out to be an overtime win over Newberry. This was part of a conference challenge event, which is kind of a partial round robin. 2 teams from the South Atlantic came in and played 2 teams from Conference Carolinas. The conference foes didn't play each other, as that's for later on, but UNCP played the 2 South Atlantic teams and so on. And so those 2 games were at 11 and 1 or something like that on Saturday afternoon. Meanwhile, the conference volleyball tournament was going on. Saturday evening was the semifinals. UNCP had a comeback win in that semifinal game in volleyball just after the marathon football game, which was over 4 hours long, had completed across the street. Fast forward to Sunday, volleyball is playing for the conference championship. I believe it was against Emmanuel, and they won the first 2 sets. It's something like 18-18 in the third set, and then the press release comes across that football coach Shane Richardson is not being retained So some breaking news in the middle of all that. From my shoes, very chaotic, certainly, as volleyball's trying to close out what was, by the way, an improbable conference championship. They were just a couple years removed from a very lengthy, years-long losing streak in conference play, and had come back to build the program and quickly and get to win the conference. And they ultimately did win the conference title. It came in 4 sets, which somewhat thankfully for me, frankly, because of the breaking news that was going on across the street at the football building with Coach Richardson being let go. So, and then after volleyball, writing the story on that, on Coach Richardson, talking to AD Dick Christie. So it was a very, very wild 36 hours. And then there were 2 basketball games still to be played as well in that conference challenge Sunday evening. And I've talked to some of the UNCP staff since then, and they too pointed to that weekend as just one of the craziest 2-day stretches they can remember as well. But so that football game was part of that, and Concord returns to Pembroke on Saturday for the first time since here 52 weeks later. And you can read about all this, the high school football playoff games, UNCP's game coming up with Concord. There'll be a preview story still to come on that. But you can read all this on Robesonian.com as well as in the print edition of the Robesonian. We're just getting started here at the Robesonian Sports Report. It's basketball season has gotten underway, and Coach Drew Richards from UNCP men's basketball will join us here after the break. You're listening to the Robesonian Sports Report on WAGR. And back on the Robesonian Sports Report here on WAGR, and we're joined over the phone by UNCP men's basketball head coach Drew Richards. How is it going, Coach?
Good. How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Yep. Thanks for coming on. And you guys are a couple games into the season. Played the Small College Basketball Hall of Fame Classic over the weekend down in Florida. So what's your assessment of your team so far?
Well, I mean, there's some good, there's some bad. So kind of where you thought at this point, I guess. It's good to play such quality competition because they really expose your flaws early. And, playing the number 20 team in the country on Saturday and then turn around and playing who should probably be undoubtedly a top 20 team who's, receiving votes or 30th or however you want to phrase it on Sunday, back-to-back games. It's tough for anybody, but, especially with Florida Southern being the host team. But, like I said, it was a great experience. I think it gave us enough to leave out the weekend saying we've got some good things going on and we've got some things we've got to fix, and we've got to fix them fairly quickly.
Yeah, and that tough schedule continues with Lincoln Memorial up in Tennessee on Friday and then at USC Aiken on Sunday. Obviously, you were really wanting to test your guys early with this slate you've put together.
Yeah, that was kind of the goal. At the end of last year, I felt like when we got to the NCAA tournament, we went on obviously a great 18-game win streak and all that, and really had the fires kicking. And then we got to the NCAA tournament, and I felt like when we finally came across a team that was physically as big as we were, or as skilled, or whatever the case may be, we kind of shrunk down a little bit. And so the goal was this year is to expose our team, because we have more returners this year, and to kind of expose them to better teams early, and then learn from those games, and then hopefully, down the stretch of the season, if you're lucky enough to make postseason play, it's not a shocker if you run into a Lincoln Memorial or a team that's like Emporia State or a team like USC Aiken. You've already kind of seen them, played them, win or loss. You've learned from it. You've learned how to guard them, and then kind of go from there. So that was kind of our goal going into the season. Obviously, it's a lot more fun to talk about than it is to be in the middle of it, especially when you drop one or two or whatever the case may be. But once we get through this game stretch, I'm hoping that we can learn a lot about ourselves and utilize it as almost like a vehicle to continue to get better and improve down the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you guys were kind of battle-tested even before playing a game that had counted because of the exhibition games at Houston and Duke. What were those experiences like getting to go play those top 10 teams?
Well, I mean, it's tough because no matter how great schematically you feel like you're preparing, or there's just some stuff you can't do. It doesn't matter how good of a defensive team you are at our level. If you're going against Kyle Filipowski, he's probably going to do kind of what he wants. And there's not many drills you can do that prepare you for a 7-1 guy that can bring the ball up the floor and initiate offense. So, but like our goals going into Houston and going into Duke, and obviously Houston's known to be the hardest playing team in the United States and in college basketball, and that grit and toughness that they take pride in, something that we try to take pride in as well. And so you really just go in those games, one, wanting to enjoy the experience for your players, and then two is just how can you learn from it? What segments of the game, were you competitive in a 2 or 3 or 4 minute span? Were you more competitive in the second half? I mean, I thought the second half at Houston, I think we guarded really well. I think we held them like 38%, which is great. I know they're not known as an offensive team, but just to hold a team like that to that percentage in the second half is fantastic. And then at Duke, I think score was 50-40 at Duke in the second half. Taking positives away from those experiences, both enjoying it and then being able to take it away, say, and building on those, going into games that count, like we did this past weekend.
And how meaningful was it to get to present Kelvin Sampson with a Conference Carolinas championship ring from UNCP? He, of course, a UNCP alum and Pembroke native.
I mean, it definitely was. I mean, a highlight of my time at UNCP and really just my coaching time. He's done so much. He's such a good person to our program and our university. I can't say it more times than enough. That just the things that he does back and the support and the exposure. I mean, it tells you what kind of guy he is. After we beat Emporia State, one of the first texts I got was from Coach Sampson, congratulating me and congratulating us. And so, just to show him a little bit of appreciation for what he's done for us in the form of a ring or whatever the case may be. It's just a very small token of our thanks to him and his family and his wife Karen, his daughter Lauren, and his son Kellen for their support, not only, like talking to people about UNCP, giving exposure for the institution, and then just taking care of us on a trip down there and putting a great post-game reception together. And they're good to us. So if we can do something, just a small token, just to show appreciation, that's what we try to do.
Here on the Robesonian Sports Report on WAGR, I'm your host, Chris Stiles, sports editor at the Robesonian, and we're talking with UNCP men's basketball head coach Drew Richards. And you've got a lot of returners on this team. I believe it was 78% of the scoring is back from last year. So how valuable is the leadership that some of those returning guys are providing for you guys?
It's critical, but I think the other thing too is, roles change year from year, and so having a bunch of returners, and I'm not sure if Cortez Marion Holmes is factored into that percentage or not. Obviously, we're looking forward to getting Tez back off a knee injury, hopefully, and hopefully mid-December, end of December, beginning of January. But each year their roles change, so it is great to have experience back. Guys know they have gone through the ringer. But there always is adapting process with some returners if their roles have been modified. A guy like Bradley Haskell was kind of a go-to scorer last year. We kind of challenged Bradley to be more of a facilitator at times this year. A guy like Javante Waverly, we kind of played him off the ball last year. We wanted to be more on the ball this year. We want Elijah Cobb to be a lot more aggressive offensively than he's been in the years past. So, having that returning is great, having that core coming back, and they understand kind of what's going on, but also those guys are still at times getting used to what we're asking of them this year, whether it's more, whether it's less, whether it's a different role, whether it's a different impact on the floor. And so they're adapting to that, and I think they're doing a good job, but we still have a little ways to go as far as just fully accepting what we need out of them this year compared to last.
And a couple of key transfers in the front court with Josh Berenbaum and Jamarvius Jones. What are they bringing to the table? And then also, more broadly, what are you looking for in guys that you're getting out of the transfer portal, obviously with that being such a big part of college basketball nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, G, or Jamarvius, whose nickname is G, which has a lot less syllables than I like to talk. But, But G has been kind of biding his time. He's had kind of to adapt to how we do things, especially on the defensive end this year. He's probably been asked to defend more this year than he has his entire career. And so he's done a good job kind of keeping his head up. I mean, there's been times when we pulled him out pretty early and he hasn't played a whole lot. Like at Houston, he didn't play a whole lot, but he's kind of kept his head down and kept working. And, I mean, he had some huge minutes with Bradley out against Florida Southern. He came in and gave us a huge lift off the bench. So one thing we going into this year, kind of to go back on the second part of your question, we try to go into every year with, okay, what did we lack this year? Coming off last year's season, we knew we lacked length and shooting in the backup wing spot behind Nigel. And so our goal is we got to find a long, athletic wing that can make shots, something that we didn't have. So that was kind of why we brought G in, to kind of fill that void. Bringing Berenbaum in, who's had some success at Division I and Division II levels. I just thought we needed to add in another guy who was super skilled in our forward spots, that could stretch the defense, that could score, that could handle. Obviously we've been on, and then same thing with Josh. Josh is getting used to how we, emphasize defensive rebounding. Josh is a good rebounder. We're pushing him to be a better rebounder than he has shown the first couple games. And then defensively challenge him to guard smaller players or be more physical with bigger guys. But looking at last year, it's like, okay, we didn't really have another guy outside of Elijah Cobb that we could really stretch the defense consistently in our other forward spots. So we're like, okay, where can we find it? And, obviously Josh, we got kind of lucky with Josh because of he's a 4-4 transfer. We had recruited him previously before he went to North Florida. And so we were able to get a waiver. And with his waiver, I mean, I thought he brings another level of offensive firepower that we need, especially off our bench. But it's consistent challenging those transfers to get used to how we do things on the defense and rebounding end.
And a lot of teams out there have lofty goals, have high expectations, and rightfully so. But for you guys, having had the success that you had last season, how much does that kind of change that as you're looking to try to do it again because you have done it previously?
Well, I just think it's definitely a different, however you want to say, pressure for our team or different approach for our team, because last year we kind of snuck up on people. I don't think anyone thought losing 5 starters off, the team that we had the year before, that we were going to be any good last year. I didn't know either. I mean, I had no idea. And so, having the team that we had last year, there weren't a lot of pressure or expectations on that team. So we kind of obviously exceeded what people thought we were going to do. Going into this year, ranked 8th in the country in the preseason poll and all that stuff, get a lot more preseason love. There's going to be a lot more people watching and a lot more pressure and a lot more, the whole, target on our back situation. And so, those guys, I think, as our team, I think we've got to get used to that. That's not something that a lot of these guys have experienced in their time at UNCP. So, like I said, people are going to give us their best shot every night. I mean, just like Florida Southern. I mean, Florida Southern had an incredible game against us. Sadly, their best player tore his ACL with a minute left in the game. But he was, that with him and that team, I think they're an elite team. But they gave us everything we could handle. And we've got to be expecting that every time we step on a floor against a quality opponent or opponent that's not been as good in the past. They're going to give us what they got. And so I think our guys are getting used to that. They're going to have to get used to that and adapting to that as we go here. But, there could be a couple more wake-ups on the horizon to say, hey, you got to show up every game because you're not the secret Pembroke anymore. Everyone knows who you are. They're going to come at you.
And the UNCP athletics community suffering a big loss this week with P.J. Smith passing away, the former wrestling coach at age 76. What are some memories that you have of him being around campus?
So yeah, obviously I wasn't here when PJ was here. As far as on campus itself, in the times I got to pass him, I mean, I heard a lot of stories about him from OT. I heard a lot of really positive things about him. There was a lot of PJ Smith fans rolling around UNCP. So I heard every time I interacted with him, he was very cordial, and he's a funny guy, and obviously I know a lot of people that were close to him, and anytime a legend passes away, however close anybody at UNCP was, it's obviously going to be sad because it's such a close-knit community. So he will be missed. I know OT is going to be, we'll all be thinking of OT and Coach PJ's family in our thoughts and prayers.
And then Bob Knight passed away last week as well, and I know you had some interactions with him. You were posting a little bit about that on social media. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to kind of get to know Coach Knight. He had recruited me when I was in high school, starting my sophomore year. I actually thought it was a joke. The first letter I got from him, I thought I was getting punked by some friends of mine. But he all of a sudden, him and his son started showing up to our games. And one of my, I have some fond memories. One of my fondest memories was we were playing an AU tournament in Denton, Texas, and I went baseline on a guy and dunked on him and yelled. And after I yelled, I got a technical from the official. And Coach Knight actually stood up on the baseline and went over and argued on my behalf during an AU game with the official, which I don't know if it was because of me or it was just because they gave him an opportunity to argue with an official. But no, getting to know him and his son Pat. I was texting my high school coach about it, being able to sit on our porch in Rogersville, Missouri. My dad's grilling bratwurst out, and him and Coach Knight and his son Pat, my high school coach and my high school coach's son, we're all just sitting there talking, and he's telling stories about anger management, his role in anger management with Adam Sandler, and playing golf with George Bush, and then getting picked up on my official visit at Texas Tech and getting to know him even more. I mean, it was kind of just, I don't even know how to describe it. It felt like it wasn't real. Sitting next to Coach Knight as his seatbelt dingers going off because he refuses to put his seatbelt in because he doesn't want to prove his car right. I mean, stuff like that I think back and laugh about. But no, it was amazing to get to know him. He's every bit of everything everyone thinks. He was a phenomenal coach, but getting to know him on a personal level, he was deep down a really caring dude, and he was always great to myself and our family.
Coach Drew Richards, thanks for joining us here on the Robesonian Sports Report.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Appreciate you.
Yep, and we'll be right back after this. Back on the Robesonian Sports Report here on WAGR. I'm your host, Chris Stiles, sports editor at the Robesonian. And usually in the last segment each week, we look ahead to the week that is to come in high school football locally, but the season has ended for all 5 of Robeson County's local high schools. But we're still going to make this, at least this week, a preview segment as we're going to look at UNCP men's and women's basketball as the season is underway for the men and is about to get underway for the Lady Braves. So for UNCP's men's basketball team, they're coming off a Conference Carolina's regular season championship last year, and they return a significant portion of the roster from that team. 78% of the scoring is back, 85% of the rebounding is back. Now, as Coach Richards pointed out, those numbers do include Cortez Marion Holmes, who's currently out injured for a few more weeks. Around late December, early January is when they're expecting him back. But nonetheless, a lot of the team back from that conference championship team. They're already a battle-tested group, having faced Houston and Duke, Division I top 10 opponents on the road in in preseason play, I should say, and then a tough non-conference schedule to start the regular season. Braves are off to a 1-1 start already, having beaten Emporia State 78-73 and lost to Florida Southern on Sunday 87-82 down in Lakeland, Florida. Braves certainly have a strong backcourt, some depth there. Bradley Haskell scored 13 a game last year and had over 2 assists per game last year. Juwan Carr, a double-digit score as well, and nearly 3 assists per game last year. Nigel Verdier is kind of out on the wing but I kind of lump him in with the guards a little bit there. And Javante Waverly as well, 9 points and 4 rebounds per game for him last year. Freshman Dallas Gardner had a really good showing at Duke, 21 points in that game. Not necessarily as strong in some of the other outings for the Braves so far, but certainly showing a lot of potential there. And then freshman Will Gray will also contribute in the backcourt. The front court I mentioned is missing Cortez Marion Holmes for now, but others have a great chance to step up. A couple returners, Elijah Cobb and Amari Miller. Miller, a breakout performer really in the Saturday win for UNCP with 24 points and 14 rebounds in that game. And then transfers Jamarvius Jones from Glenville State, along an athletic player who can shoot the ball pretty well, as well as Josh Berenbaum is also very athletic, the Cal Poly Humboldt transfer. So certainly, even without Marion Holmes, a pretty strong front court for the Braves. They are picked to repeat as Conference Carolina's champion. Braves were number 8 in the coaches poll in the preseason. That's probably going to drop a little bit when the next poll comes out, since they did lose a game. But nonetheless, they'll you would think would remain among the top 15 or 20 or so here at this point of the season, and certainly a chance to build that ranking back up as more games are to be played. I mentioned when we were talking to Coach Richards at Lincoln Memorial, who's a top 10 team in Division II on Friday. That'll be a tough one, but certainly yet another chance for the Braves to become battle-tested, even regardless of the result, but it would certainly be a big win if they can pull it off up in Harrogate, Tennessee. And then UNCP women's basketball, they too are bringing a lot back from a conference championship team. They did not win the regular season title, but they won the tournament title in Conference Carolinas last year, which was the first conference tournament title in program history, as well as the school's first NCAA tournament berth in the Division II tournament, and John Haskins' first tournament berth in 29 years of coaching. He was the men's coach for 10 years, and then last year was his 19th season, this year's 20th with the Lady Braves. And the top 9 scorers are back from that team. Some double-digit scoring averages in the backcourt from Courtney Smith, Zaria Clark, and Kaleha Hall, and some depth pieces with Kelsey Adams, Alcina Purnell, and Anaya McManus. They have just terrific depth in the backcourt. I will mention Courtney Smith is still a few weeks out from her return. You'll recall she tore ACL in the regular season finale last year. She was the best player. I believe at the time I wrote the best player, both kind of statistically and spiritually is the word I used, kind of leading the troops there. And yet they went on that great tournament run, even with her unable to play. So, but she'll be a valuable piece when she returns here in a few weeks for the Braves. In the front court, some experience from Hannah Russell, Lillian Flantos, Malia Garrison. It's more of a guard-heavy team, but that front court production is also very adequate for the Lady Braves. And this is a defensive team, a defensive strength team. They went through, actually, a stretch of a few games last year, 4 or 5 in a row, that they allowed for that stretch. It was something like 42, 44 points a game. So that shows you what they're capable of on the defensive end. Even the conference championship game last year, it really kind of had almost a Virginia basketball feel, not necessarily with the offensive pace, but defensively, with how they were able to stop the opposition. It was Belmont Abbey in that case, and held them, I believe it was 47 points in the conference tournament final up at Wofford last year. So, and the Lady Braves are also picked to win Conference Carolinas. They're trying to add a regular season title this year to that tournament title from a season ago. They were third in the regular season last year. They kick off their season in a little 2-day event up at Coker. They'll play the hosts, Coker, on Saturday, and then face Wingate there on the neutral floor on Sunday. And it's basketball preview time of year for us at the Robesonian. Starting to had a men's preview in Wednesday's paper. We'll have a women's basketball preview here coming up later this week. And then we'll start previewing high school basketball locally here in the weeks to come as well. Also, other content on the Robesonian football stories from last week, and UNCP football preview still to come this week, as well as game coverage on Saturday. We got middle school, the county championship. Middle school volleyball was on Tuesday, and middle school football championship next week as well. remembering P.J. Smith, the UNCP wrestling coach that passed away this week, the former coach, I should say. And then something unique is also in the works for aiming for later this week on this story that I think dog lovers will enjoy. So a little bit of everything, certainly, with the Robesonian sports section right now. And I'll also add I was involved in local election coverage on Tuesday night, as that's certainly a big news story, kind of an all-hands-on-deck type of news story for us at the Robesonian, as Bruce Davis won a third term as Lumberton mayor, and some city council seats were also up for grabs, and I was involved in those stories as well. For all of us here at WAGR, Paul Matthews behind the scenes, I'm Chris Stiles, sports editor at the Robesonian. Thanks to Drew Richards for joining us, and thanks to you for joining us as well here on the Robesonian Sports Report on WAGR.